Hey everyone, welcome back to Udeid Expert, your smart learning hub. In the tense and unpredictable landscape of the Middle East, sudden escalations have often rewritten the course of regional security, and one of the most startling developments came when Iran launched a surprise barrage of missiles toward a U.S. military base in Qatar. This unexpected strike was not simply an isolated act of aggression but the culmination of years of simmering tension, shifting alliances, and regional power struggles that had been playing out both in open arenas and behind closed diplomatic doors. To understand the gravity of such a move, one must first look at the broader strategic picture. Iran has long perceived U.S. military installations across the Gulf as symbols of American presence and influence in the region, and Qatar, with its significant U.S. base housing advanced aircraft and defense systems, has been a focal point of strategic importance. When the missiles were suddenly launched, it was not just a tactical strike but a message delivered at a global scale, instantly sparking discussions about deterrence, retaliation, and the fragile balance of power in the Gulf. Eyewitnesses and defense analysts reported that the attack occurred in the early hours of the morning, a time often chosen for surprise operations because radar operators and defense teams are at their lowest levels of alertness. Iran's arsenal includes a range of short and medium-range ballistic missiles capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers, and this strike appeared to involve a coordinated use of several launch platforms, creating a barrage effect that made interception far more difficult. The choice of a missile barrage instead of a limited strike was significant. It overwhelmed defensive systems momentarily, forcing the base to activate multiple layers of defense almost simultaneously. For U.S. commanders stationed in the Gulf, the moments between missile detection and potential impact were critical. Alarm systems sounded, personnel rushed to hardened shelters, and missile defense batteries prepared to respond in real time. The launch sent shockwaves across intelligence communities worldwide because it demonstrated both capability and intent, two elements that, when combined, have the power to reshape geopolitical calculations overnight. The attack did not take place in a vacuum. In the weeks leading up to it, there had been rising rhetoric between Tehran and Washington, each side accusing the other of interference and destabilization. Iran, often vocal about U.S. military presence so close to its borders, had repeatedly issued warnings that foreign bases in the Gulf were within its range. By carrying out a strike on Qatar's U.S. base, Iran was not only testing America's military readiness but also sending a reminder to regional allies that their proximity to U.S. assets could make them targets in a larger confrontation. For Qatar, a nation that hosts American forces while maintaining pragmatic relations with its neighbors, this moment was particularly sensitive. The government found itself in a precarious position, balancing its role as a U.S. ally with the geographic reality of living next to a powerful neighbor capable of launching such attacks. What made the barrage even more significant was the precision and coordination involved. Military analysts noted that Iran's missile program, often underestimated in the past, had clearly evolved to a point where synchronized launches could saturate advanced defense systems. Reports suggested that several missiles were intercepted by U.S. defense batteries, including the Patriot missile system, but the fact that multiple warheads still threatened the perimeter highlighted the challenge of dealing with large-scale barrages. This was a sobering reminder that no matter how advanced a defense system may be, the sheer volume of incoming fire can create vulnerabilities. The base, though protected, experienced shockwaves from nearby impacts, shaking infrastructure and sending a clear psychological message to everyone stationed there. Iran's reach was not theoretical, it was real, immediate, and operational. The political ripple effects were instantaneous. Global news outlets carried the story within minutes, flashing headlines of Iran's missile barrage and U.S. base under attack in Qatar. Stock markets in the region reacted nervously. Energy prices spiked due to fears of disruption in the Gulf's vital shipping lanes, and international leaders issued urgent statements calling for restraint. In Washington, emergency security meetings were convened, with top defense and intelligence officials briefing the president on the scale and intent of the attack. The Pentagon classified the strike as a major escalation, not just because of the physical damage but because it represented a direct challenge to U.S. deterrence in the Gulf. A barrage of this scale implied preparation, logistics, and political will on Iran's part, all of which elevated the risk of a wider conflict if the U.S. chose to respond in kind. For ordinary people watching the news, the images of missile trails cutting through the night sky over the Gulf served as a stark reminder of how quickly stability could unravel. Civilians in Doha and surrounding areas reported hearing distant booms and seeing flashes, though the primary target remained the military base. While official statements avoided mentioning casualties in detail, the attack underscored the vulnerability of hosting foreign military installations in volatile regions. The incident quickly became the subject of heated debate in international forums, with allies of the U.S. expressing solidarity and adversaries pointing to the strike as evidence of shifting power dynamics in the Middle East. From a military perspective, the strike raised important questions about the future of missile defense and regional security arrangements. Could U.S. bases in the Gulf remain safe from saturation attacks? Would more advanced systems like TOD be deployed more widely? And perhaps most importantly, how would the U.S. recalibrate its strategy in light of an adversary that had demonstrated both the capability and the boldness to carry out such a direct strike? Defense experts noted that while the immediate response would focus on strengthening defenses and reassuring allies, the long-term implications were far more complex. Every missile launched by Iran carried not just explosive power but also symbolic weight, signaling a shift in the deterrence equation. For Iran, the Barrage was presented domestically as a show of strength, proof that its military could strike high-value targets and withstand global scrutiny. State media emphasized the technological advancements of its missile program, framing the attack as both defensive and retaliatory against what it called U.S. provocations in the region. This narrative reinforced internal unity while simultaneously challenging the image of American invulnerability. For the U.S., however, the attack was a wake-up call, highlighting the risks of maintaining extensive military infrastructure in contested spaces. The decision of how to respond, whether through military retaliation, economic pressure, or diplomatic maneuvering, would not only define the next chapter of U.S.-Iran relations but also shape the stability of the broader Middle East. Ultimately, the surprise missile barrage on the U.S. base in Qatar marked more than just a military event, it was a geopolitical turning point. It reminded the world that in regions where rivalries run deep and alliances are fragile, the margin between peace and conflict can be measured in seconds, the time it takes for a missile to travel from launchpad to target. While the physical impacts could be repaired and defenses strengthened, the psychological and strategic shockwaves would linger much longer. Global audiences, policymakers, and military planners alike were left asking the same urgent question: was this the beginning of a dangerous new phase, or a dramatic warning meant to stop one from unfolding? When the dust began to settle after Iran's sudden missile barrage on the U.S. base in Qatar, the true scale of devastation gradually came into focus. In the immediate aftermath, the base was engulfed in smoke and confusion, with alarms still blaring and emergency crews rushing toward impacted zones. Although modern defenses had intercepted several of the incoming projectiles, the sheer number of missiles launched ensured that some slipped past the protective shield, striking critical areas near the perimeter of the installation. This created a dual shock for both those stationed at the base and observers around the world. While the United States had long maintained that its Gulf bases were among the most secure in the world, the reality of missile fragments reaching their targets revealed vulnerabilities that could not be ignored. Reports began emerging from military correspondents and defense officials, describing damaged infrastructure, disrupted operations, and the immediate mobilization of medical and emergency teams. Though official sources were careful in releasing details, it was confirmed that several sections of the base suffered structural damage. Buildings shook under the force of nearby blasts, vehicles parked along the runways were destroyed or heavily damaged, and supply depots in certain sectors sustained hits that disrupted logistics. The base's communication systems briefly went offline, a testament to the power of the strike and its ability to disrupt operations even if only for a short time. For those inside the base, the experience was described as a terrifying sequence of alarms, flashes, and vibrations that seemed to last much longer than the actual barrage. The question of casualties became central in the global discussion. While U.S. officials initially remained cautious, confirming only some personnel were injured, it was clear that the strike had taken a toll. Military analysts explained that in such attacks, even when direct hits on living quarters are avoided, shockwaves, flying debris, and fires can lead to injuries. Emergency medical teams worked rapidly to stabilize those affected, transferring them to nearby facilities for further treatment. While casualty figures were deliberately kept limited in official statements to avoid escalating tensions, it was widely understood that the strike had left its mark not only on infrastructure but also on human lives. Beyond the immediate physical damage, the psychological impact was immense. Service members stationed at the base, many of whom had trained extensively for such scenarios, now found themselves experiencing the reality of incoming missile fire for the first time. Interviews later described the feeling of helplessness as sirens wailed and the sky lit up with interceptors chasing incoming warheads. Families back home, upon hearing the news, endured agonizing hours awaiting confirmation that their loved ones were safe. This emotional dimension underscored the broader reality. Modern warfare is not confined to front lines but extends deeply into the lives of ordinary people connected to military operations. Satellite imagery released days after the incident provided the international community with a clearer picture of the damage. Craters marked the ground near runways, scorch marks could be seen around fuel depots, and sections of the perimeter wall bore the scars of missile impacts. Analysts used these images to gauge the accuracy of the strike, noting that while Iran had demonstrated precision capabilities, its choice of targets seemed calibrated to send a message rather than to maximize destruction. Striking near operational zones without fully destroying them suggested a strategy of intimidation, showing capability while still leaving room for escalation control. Nevertheless, the visible devastation reinforced the seriousness of the attack. Casualty discussions also sparked debates in Washington and among U.S. allies. Politicians questioned whether enough was being done to protect American personnel abroad, with some demanding immediate reinforcements and others warning against overreaction. Allies in Europe and the Gulf expressed concern for the safety of their own troops and advisors, many of whom also operate in joint facilities with American forces. The fact that injuries occurred despite multiple defense layers highlighted the difficulty of countering saturation strikes, raising pressing questions about future base security and the need for technological upgrades. Meanwhile, Iran framed the aftermath differently. State media highlighted images of damaged infrastructure, claiming it as proof of their missile strength and as a symbolic victory. They emphasized that their forces had demonstrated the ability to penetrate advanced U.S. defenses, portraying the event as a response to what they called American interference in regional affairs. While Iran stopped short of celebrating casualties, the narrative was carefully constructed to highlight the humiliation of a superpower unable to fully shield its assets. This psychological warfare was just as significant as the physical strikes themselves, shaping perceptions both regionally and globally. For Qatar, the host nation, the aftermath was a delicate balancing act. Officials swiftly reassured citizens that the situation was under control, emergency measures were being taken, and civilian areas had been spared. Nevertheless, the reality that foreign bases on Qatari soil had become active targets caused anxiety among the population. Public discourse in Doha shifted toward questions about national security, sovereignty, and the risks of hosting foreign military operations. This internal unease, combined with global media coverage, added another layer of complexity to the broader geopolitical fallout. Energy markets, too, reacted sharply to the revelation of damage and casualties. With Qatar being one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, any threat to its stability immediately sends ripples through global supply chains. Investors feared that escalating strikes could jeopardize production or transport routes, leading to spikes in energy prices and renewed concerns over supply security. Economists pointed out that while the physical infrastructure for energy exports remained intact, the psychological effect on markets was undeniable, amplifying the global impact of the missile barrage. In terms of military planning, the revelation of damage and casualties acted as a catalyst for urgent reviews. Defense departments across NATO examined their own vulnerabilities, questioning whether their overseas installations could withstand similar saturation strikes. U.S. strategists initiated assessments on reinforcing base defenses with more layered systems, underground facilities, and improved early warning mechanisms. The attack was no longer just a regional incident. It had become a case study in modern warfare, influencing military planning well beyond the Gulf. Ultimately, the revelation of devastation and casualties brought home a sobering truth. Even the most advanced military powers are not immune to the realities of modern missile warfare. While technology can intercept and neutralize threats, no system is foolproof against massed and coordinated attacks. The incident in Qatar served as both a warning and a wake-up call, not only for the US but for all nations with forward-deployed forces in volatile regions. It demonstrated that beyond the physical losses, the psychological and strategic costs of such strikes could ripple far and wide, shaping global policy debates, altering market dynamics, and redefining security assumptions. The world watched closely, knowing that how the US chose to acknowledge and respond to the devastation would set the tone for what might follow. As the night sky over Qatar lit up with streaks of incoming missiles, the US base quickly transitioned from shock to action. Within seconds of detecting Iran's sudden barrage, defense protocols were triggered, unleashing a sophisticated multi-layered shield designed precisely for such a moment. The US military has long maintained that its overseas installations are fortified with some of the world's most advanced defensive technologies, and on this night, those systems were put to the ultimate test. Alarms blared across the base as personnel rushed to hardened shelters while command centers activated the Patriot missile defense batteries stationed around the perimeter. Operators, trained for countless hours to respond under extreme pressure, locked onto the incoming warheads and launched interceptors with split-second precision. What followed was a dramatic spectacle of modern warfare, fiery trails of intercepting missiles rising into the dark sky, colliding mid-air with incoming projectiles, and exploding in blinding flashes that echoed across the desert. The first layer of defense consisted of radar arrays scanning the horizon for launch signatures. Once the threat was identified, data was fed into tracking systems that calculated trajectories within milliseconds. For each incoming missile, the computer systems determined the most likely impact point, prioritizing which posed the greatest danger to critical infrastructure or personnel zones. This process, though automated, required human confirmation, a reminder that behind the flashing screens and technical jargon were real individuals making life and death decisions. As one military analyst later explained, when the alarms sound, you're not just defending equipment, you're defending every person in that base. The adrenaline of those moments was indescribable, as defense crews launched interceptor after interceptor, determined to prevent a catastrophe. Even as the Patriots roared into action, another defensive element came online: counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar systems, designed to shoot down smaller projectiles at close range. These systems added a protective bubble over sections of the base, giving personnel inside an added layer of reassurance. The combined effect was formidable. Observers described the sky as a battlefield of its own, with crisscrossing missile trails, sudden flashes of interception, and the echoing thunder of explosions above. To civilians in Doha and nearby towns, the sound carried like distant fireworks, but for those on the ground inside the base, each flash represented a potential life saved. Despite the chaos, the US defensive response was remarkably coordinated. Communication systems ensured that different batteries did not waste interceptors on the same target, while ground controllers worked tirelessly to maintain order under stress. The discipline of these operations was the result of years of training and preparation, reflecting the US military's commitment to readiness. The barrage may have been unexpected, but the response showed that the defenders were anything but unprepared. As interceptors found their marks, cheers reportedly erupted inside the control rooms, even as fresh warnings appeared on screens signaling new incoming missiles. Not every missile was intercepted, however. Analysts later explained that no defense system in the world can claim a 100% success rate against saturation attacks, especially when dozens of projectiles are launched in quick succession. Still, the fact that the majority were destroyed mid-air testified to the effectiveness of US defenses. Damage was minimized compared to what it could have been, and many lives were likely spared because of the speed and accuracy of the response. In essence, the defensive fightback turned what could have been a devastating disaster into a moment of resilience and proof of capability. Beyond the missile batteries, the U.S. Navy also played a role in the defense. Warships stationed in the Gulf, equipped with Aegis combat systems, tracked the missile launches in real time, relaying critical data to the base. Though they did not engage directly during this particular incident, their presence created a broader shield of surveillance and coordination, ensuring that no launch went undetected. The integration of land-based and sea-based assets reflected the layered defense approach the U.S. relies on in high-risk regions, where threats can come from multiple directions simultaneously. Inside the base, military personnel took shelter in fortified bunkers, following practice drills that prioritized both safety and order. Medical teams stood ready, anticipating potential casualties, while engineers prepared to assess damage as soon as it was safe to do so. These support roles, though less visible than the interceptors blazing across the sky, were equally critical. They ensured that even if defenses were breached, the base could continue functioning and recover quickly. One officer later described the scene as organized chaos, a moment where everyone knew their role, and every action contributed to survival. For the international community watching, the U.S. defense response was closely scrutinized. Military experts emphasized how the event highlighted both the strengths and limitations of current missile defense systems. The successful interceptions demonstrated that advanced technology, training, and preparation could blunt even a large-scale attack. At the same time, the sheer stress placed on defense crews and the acknowledgement that a few missiles did penetrate raised questions about what future conflicts might look like if adversaries used even larger barrages or more advanced weaponry. The balance between defense and offense, once again, became a central subject in strategic discussions. In Washington, the effectiveness of the defenses was presented as a point of reassurance. Pentagon officials emphasized that despite the scale of the Iranian attack, the base remained operational and resilient. The narrative was clear. While Iran had shown its ability to launch, the United States had proven its ability to defend. This was not just a message to domestic audiences but also to allies across the Gulf, who rely heavily on U.S. military support for their own protection. By showing that American defenses could withstand such a test, Washington aimed to reassure regional partners that they were not alone in the face of growing threats. Psychologically, the fightback was also significant for those stationed at the base. Surviving a barrage through a successful defense created a sense of unity and morale. Personnel knew they had faced one of the most intense moments of their careers and had emerged alive, thanks to the systems and the people operating them. This strengthened the resolve of many and reinforced confidence in the military structure that protected them. At the same time, it left a lingering awareness that vigilance could never falter, because the next barrage could come at any time. Ultimately, the U.S. defense fightback transformed the night into a demonstration of resilience and advanced preparation. While Iran's barrage had shocked the world, the ability of the U.S. base to withstand the majority of it underscored the effectiveness of defensive technology and the dedication of the people who operated it. For analysts, the incident became a case study in modern warfare, how offense and defense are locked in a constant race, each side adapting and innovating to outmatch the other. For the global audience, it was a reminder that even in moments of chaos, discipline, preparation, and technology can make the difference between devastation and survival. As the echoes of Iran's missile barrage still reverberated across the Gulf, another battle was already unfolding thousands of miles away, in Washington, D.C. Unlike the clash of missiles and interceptors over Qatar, this confrontation was fought in conference rooms, situation rooms, and the halls of Congress. It was a battle of ideas, strategies, and political calculations, centered on one urgent question: how should the United States respond? Within minutes of receiving reports of the strike, top military and intelligence officials rushed into the White House Situation Room. Screens flickered with live satellite feeds, radar tracks, and early damage assessments, while uniformed officers briefed the president and senior advisors on the extent of the attack. The facts were sobering. Iran had launched dozens of missiles, some of which had evaded defenses and struck near sensitive parts of the base. There were confirmed injuries, structural damage, and a shaken sense of security. Yet, despite the seriousness of the situation, one critical truth remained: the U.S. base was still operational, and its defenses had largely held. That detail would become central in shaping the debate to follow. Inside the Situation Room, the conversation was tense but methodical. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff laid out immediate military options: targeted airstrikes on Iranian missile launch sites, cyber operations to disrupt command systems, or a larger campaign to degrade Iran's long-range strike capabilities. Each option came with risks. Airstrikes risked escalation into full-scale conflict. Cyber measures could be effective but might not deliver a visible response strong enough to deter future attacks. A full campaign would certainly demonstrate overwhelming strength but would pull the U.S. into a conflict few Americans were eager to embrace after years of engagements in the Middle East. The president, seated at the head of the table, listened carefully as advisors outlined both the tactical feasibility and the political consequences of each choice. Simultaneously, the Pentagon worked around the clock to provide detailed assessments. Analysts evaluated where the missiles had been launched from, what platforms were used, and how quickly Iran could reload for another barrage. Intelligence officers presented satellite images showing suspected launch sites deep inside Iranian territory, some mobile and hidden, others fixed and more vulnerable. The defense secretary emphasized that any retaliatory strike would need to be both precise and carefully calibrated, not only to neutralize threats but also to avoid drawing in regional actors who might be reluctant to see another war in the Gulf. While the military debate played out behind closed doors, Washington's political stage was also heating up. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers demanded answers. Hawks called for decisive retaliation, arguing that failing to strike back would embolden Iran and undermine U.S. credibility worldwide. "We cannot allow American bases to be targeted with impunity," declared one senator in a fiery speech, echoing sentiments that resonated strongly with audiences still shocked by the news coverage. Doves, however, urged caution. They warned that another conflict in the Middle East could spiral out of control, risking both American lives and global economic stability. "Retaliation may satisfy calls for strength," argued another lawmaker, "but it could ignite a regional war we cannot afford." The public debate mirrored the private one: strength versus restraint, deterrence versus escalation. Think tanks and media outlets added fuel to the discourse. Defense experts appeared on primetime television, dissecting every piece of information available, while op-eds in leading newspapers argued over the wisdom of striking back versus showing restraint. Some analysts argued that Iran's barrage, while dramatic, was carefully measured. It demonstrated capability without delivering catastrophic destruction. This suggested, they said, that Iran itself might not want a full war, only to signal defiance. Others countered that by allowing missiles to hit an American base at all, the U.S. risked setting a dangerous precedent if it failed to respond with overwhelming force. For the president and senior advisors, the debate was more than academic. They faced real-world consequences. American personnel had been injured, and the credibility of U.S. deterrence was on the line. Yet they also understood that a single miscalculation could trigger a chain reaction across the Middle East. Oil markets had already reacted nervously, spiking in response to fears of disrupted supply lines. Regional allies, from Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates, quietly pressed Washington for reassurance, fearing they could be the next targets. European partners called for calm, urging diplomatic de-escalation. The United Nations scheduled an emergency session to discuss the crisis, with diplomats stressing the need for restraint. In this atmosphere, every word spoken in Washington carried international weight. Inside the White House, debates often ran late into the night. One school of thought favored a swift, decisive strike to send a message of strength. Another advocated for a phased response, combining military pressure with diplomatic engagement. A third approach leaned heavily on non-military tools, sanctions, cyber disruptions, and covert measures, arguing that America could impose costs without firing a single shot. The complexity of the decision was magnified by the uncertainty surrounding Iran's intentions. Was this barrage a one-time act of defiance, or the opening salvo of a larger campaign? Without clarity, every option carried both potential benefits and enormous risks. What made the debate particularly challenging was the global audience. Both allies and adversaries were watching closely, ready to interpret America's actions as signals of its resolve or weakness. Retaliation too soft, and Washington risked emboldening not only Iran but other rivals worldwide. Retaliation too hard, and it could drag the U.S. into an open-ended regional war. As one strategist put it, this is not just about missiles in the Gulf, it's about credibility on the world stage. Meanwhile, the American public remained divided. Many citizens expressed outrage, demanding justice for the attack. Families of service members stationed abroad voiced deep concerns for their loved ones' safety, some calling for immediate withdrawal from volatile regions, others urging Washington to defend them with overwhelming force. The president's advisors knew that public opinion would shape the political space for action. A leader's choice in moments like these was not only about military strategy but also about maintaining public trust. In the end, Washington's debate over retaliation was as much about timing as about choice. Striking too quickly risked acting on incomplete intelligence. Waiting too long risked projecting hesitation. The final decision, still guarded as officials weighed the unfolding situation, would determine not just the immediate U.S. response but also the trajectory of U.S.-Iran relations for years to come. Whatever course was chosen, one fact was clear: the strike on Qatar had shattered assumptions of stability, and America's answer, whether through force, diplomacy, or a combination of both, would echo far beyond the desert sands of the Gulf. When Iran launched a sudden missile barrage targeting the U.S. military base in Qatar, the world was left stunned, watching events unfold with both fear and curiosity. The strike came without prior warning, transforming what had been a routine day for American forces stationed in the Gulf into a night of chaos, sirens, and defensive maneuvers. According to defense analysts, Iran's missile capabilities had been improving steadily over the last decade, with advancements in precision targeting, solid fuel technology, and medium to long-range systems. This strike was not simply an act of aggression, it was also a demonstration of Tehran's growing ability to project power across the Gulf region, a capability that had long been a matter of debate among security experts. Eyewitness accounts and official statements indicated that dozens of missiles were launched almost simultaneously, creating a situation where U.S. defense systems had to react instantly to intercept incoming projectiles. The attack was reportedly carried out using a mix of short and medium-range missiles, which are known for their ability to overwhelm missile defense shields if launched in large numbers at once. Military experts often refer to this strategy as saturation fire, where the sheer volume of weapons creates a higher probability that at least some will break through advanced defense systems like the U.S. Patriot batteries deployed in Qatar. The choice of Qatar as a target carried significant symbolism. The U.S. maintains its largest military presence in the Middle East at Udeid Air Base, a sprawling installation that plays a central role in American air operations across the region. By directing its missiles there, Iran was not only challenging Washington's military dominance but also sending a calculated political message to Gulf states that host U.S. forces. Analysts quickly pointed out that this was not the first time Iran had used missile power as a tool of deterrence. However, the scale and suddenness of the barrage made it one of the most significant displays of Iranian firepower in recent memory. Reports suggested that the missiles used were likely variants of the Fateh 110 and Shahab series, both of which are known for their improved accuracy and destructive potential. While official numbers regarding the total missiles launched remain classified, defense insiders estimated that upwards of 20 projectiles may have been fired in the opening wave, an indication of the seriousness behind Tehran's move. For American personnel on the ground, the experience was harrowing. Within seconds of radar detecting the launch signatures, alarms blared across the base, triggering a rehearsed yet always nerve-wracking response drill. Soldiers scrambled to bunkers, pilots prepared aircraft for emergency takeoffs, and defense crews activated interception batteries. The Patriot missile defense system reportedly engaged several incoming missiles, lighting up the night sky with fiery trails as interceptor rockets shot upward to meet the threat. Military strategists later explained that the success rate of such defense systems varies depending on the angle, speed, and volume of the incoming attack. While some missiles were intercepted mid-air, others reportedly exploded outside the base perimeter, causing shockwaves that rattled infrastructure but did not deliver a direct hit to the heart of operations. Observers noted that this event highlighted both strengths and vulnerabilities in U.S. defenses. On the one hand, the ability to respond within seconds prevented a catastrophic outcome. On the other hand, the sheer audacity of Iran's move showed that even heavily fortified bases are never fully invulnerable in the modern era of missile warfare. Commentators on global news networks stressed that the psychological impact of such an attack cannot be underestimated. For U.S. allies in the Gulf, it served as a stark reminder of the risks associated with hosting American military assets. For Washington, it raised urgent questions about escalation, deterrence, and the possibility of drawing the wider region into open conflict. Strategically, Iran's decision to unleash a surprise barrage was also deeply tied to its doctrine of asymmetric warfare. Unlike the U.S., which relies on advanced air power, naval assets, and global logistics, Iran has historically emphasized missile technology and regional proxy forces as its main tools of deterrence. By demonstrating that its missiles can strike one of the most critical U.S. hubs in the Middle East, Tehran was reinforcing its narrative that any confrontation with the Islamic Republic would come at a significant cost to American interests and those of its allies. Experts in Washington acknowledged that while the attack was dangerous, it also fell short of being a full-scale war move. Rather, it appeared designed to shock, to test U.S. defensive readiness, and to make a political point both domestically within Iran and internationally. In the aftermath, satellite imagery and defense reports showed scorch marks and impact craters in areas around the targeted base. Though U.S. officials were careful in their language, emphasizing that operations remained unaffected, analysts said the event forced a re-evaluation of missile defense strategies in the region. Social media amplified the drama, with images of fiery skies and defensive intercepts circulating widely, although many of these visuals were computer-generated or illustrative, created to give audiences a sense of the scale rather than depict real-time footage. This in itself underscores how modern conflicts are fought not only on battlefields but also in the realm of information, where perception shapes public opinion as much as facts on the ground. What makes this episode especially significant is the timing. Coming at a moment when tensions were already high in the Gulf, Iran's sudden missile strike added fuel to a volatile situation. Commentators noted that such an action would inevitably trigger a debate within Washington's corridors of power about the appropriate level of retaliation. While some argued for restraint to avoid full-scale escalation, others insisted that failing to respond decisively would embolden Tehran further. The sheer unpredictability of the strike left no doubt. The Gulf region had entered a new phase of confrontation where advanced missile technology, speed, and surprise have become central to the balance of power. In sum, Iran's surprise missile barrage was more than just a military act. It was a calculated maneuver designed to project strength, unsettle adversaries, and reshape the strategic equation of the Gulf. The attack tested U.S. defenses, rattled regional stability, and opened the door for discussions on the future of deterrence in an era where sudden, high-tech strikes can occur without warning. Though damage assessments and official responses continued to emerge in the days that followed, one fact became immediately clear. The skies over Qatar had witnessed an event that would be studied by military planners, political leaders, and historians for years to come.